The attic air was thick with dust and the musty scent of forgotten memories. I stood at the top of the narrow stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It had been 3 days since I'd inherited Grandma Rose's old Victorian house in Salem, and I still couldn't believe it was mine. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind. "Emma, your grandmother wanted you to have this. She said you'd understand why when the time comes." I took a deep breath, coughing as the dust tickled my throat. "Okay, Emma," I muttered to myself. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding up here, Grandma." My footsteps creaked on the old floorboards as I made my way deeper into the attic. Stacks of boxes and old furniture loomed like silent sentinels. I ran my fingers along the spines of dusty books and picked up a tarnished silver picture frame. My own face stared back at me, much younger, with Grandma Rose's arm around my shoulders. We were both smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a sadness or maybe a secret. "I wish you were here to explain all this, Grandma," I whispered, setting the frame down gently. As I moved deeper into the attic, my flashlight beam caught something reflective in the corner. Curiosity piqued, I made my way over, nearly tripping over a stack of old magazines. There, partially hidden under a yellowed sheet, was an old trunk. My heart raced as I knelt beside it. The brass lock was open, hanging loosely from the latch. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among old clothes and papers, was a camera. But not just any camera, a vintage Polaroid, its black and silver body gleaming despite the years of neglect. "No way," I breathed, carefully lifting it out of the trunk. It was heavier than I expected, solid and real in my hands. I turned it over, examining every inch. It seemed to be in perfect condition, as if it had been waiting for me all this time. A slip of paper fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, recognizing Grandma Rose's elegant handwriting. "For Emma. When the time is right, you'll see what others cannot. Be brave, my dear. The truth lies within the images." My hands trembled as I read the note again. "What does that mean, Grandma?" I asked the empty attic. Only silence answered. I looked back at the camera, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. Without really thinking about it, I raised the viewfinder to my eye. The attic looked different through the lens, somehow both familiar and alien. My finger hovered over the shutter button. "Here goes nothing," I whispered, and pressed down. The flash momentarily blinded me, and the mechanical whir of the camera filled the attic. I blinked away the spots in my vision, watching as the photo slowly emerged from the camera. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. As the image gradually appeared, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, standing next to me in the photo, was a smiling elderly woman I didn't recognize. But the attic behind me was empty. I was alone. "What the hell?" I gasped, nearly dropping the photo. I spun around, half expecting to see the woman standing there, but there was nothing, just the same dusty, empty attic. I looked back at the photo, my mind racing. The woman seemed so real, her smile warm and inviting. She wore clothes that looked like they were from the 1950s, and her gray hair was neatly pinned back. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. They seemed to look right at me, filled with a knowing gleam. "This isn't possible," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "It must be a trick of the light, or maybe the camera's broken." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The image was too clear, too real. I could even make out the wrinkles on the woman's hands and the pattern on her dress. Suddenly, the attic felt too small, too confining. I needed air. Clutching the camera and the photo, I stumbled down the attic stairs and into the hallway. The old house creaked and groaned around me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like an intruder. I made it to the kitchen and collapsed into a chair at the table. The camera sat in front of me, innocent-looking yet impossibly strange. The photo lay next to it, the smiling woman staring up at me. "Get a grip, Emma," I told myself, running my hands through my hair. There has to be a logical explanation for this. But Grandma Rose's note kept repeating in my mind, "You'll see what others cannot." Was this what she meant? Had she known about the camera's strange abilities? I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over my best friend Lily's number. But what would I say? "Hey Lily, I just found a magic camera that takes pictures of ghosts." She'd think I'd lost my mind. Instead, I found myself dialing another number. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Burkhart's Antiques and Oddities." "Mr. Burkhart, it's Emma Hawthorne. My grandmother, Rose Hawthorne, used to come to your shop sometimes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Burkhart spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost cautious. "Ah yes, Emma. Rose told me you might call one day. I take it you found it then?" My breath caught in my throat. "Found what exactly?" "The camera, my dear. The one that sees beyond the veil." I stared at the Polaroid on the table, a mix of fear and excitement churning in my stomach. "Mr. Burkhart, what's happening? What is this thing?" He sighed heavily. "It's not something to discuss over the phone. Come to the shop tomorrow, first thing." "And Emma?" "Yes?" "Be careful with that camera. Every photo it takes has consequences. Some you might not be prepared for." The line went dead, leaving me with more questions than answers. I looked back at the photo, at the mysterious woman's knowing smile. Who was she? Why had she appeared in my photo? As the question swirled in my mind, a new thought struck me. I rushed to the living room where a large mirror hung over the fireplace. Holding my breath, I raised the camera and snapped another photo. The flash lit up the room and I waited impatiently for the image to develop. When it did, I nearly dropped the camera in shock. The photo showed me standing in front of the mirror, but behind me, where my reflection should have been, was a swirling mass of shadows, with glowing eyes peering out. A scream caught in my throat as I spun around, but the living room was normal. No shadows, no eyes. Just me, alone in my grandmother's house, holding a camera that defied explanation. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, staring at the 2 impossible photos. Whatever was happening, whatever this camera was, I knew my life would never be the same. Grandma Rose had left me more than just a house. She'd left me a mystery, one that I was now irrevocably part of. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, I made a decision. Tomorrow I'd go see Mr. Burkhart and get some answers. But tonight, sleep was out of the question. I had an attic full of my grandmother's belongings to go through, and a growing suspicion that the Polaroid camera was just the tip of the iceberg. "What were you mixed up in, Grandma?" I whispered to the empty house. The only answer was the quiet ticking of the clock and the weight of secrets pressing in around me. With a deep breath, I stood up, gathered the photos and the camera, and headed back to the attic. Whatever truths lay hidden in this house, I was determined to uncover them. As I climbed the stairs, Grandma Rose's words echoed in my mind. "Be brave, my dear." I had a feeling I was going to need all the bravery I could muster. The morning sun streamed through the gaps in the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind too wired from the previous night's discoveries. The Polaroid camera sat on the coffee table, innocuous yet menacing in the early light. I rubbed my tired eyes, the events of last night still feeling like a surreal dream. But the 2 photos lying next to the camera were undeniable proof. This was real. "Okay, Emma," I muttered to myself. "Time to figure out what the hell is going on." I picked up the camera, its weight familiar now. My finger hovered over the shutter button, hesitation and curiosity warring within me. Mr. Burkhart's warning echoed in my mind. Every photo it takes has consequences. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know more. Taking a deep breath, I raised the camera and pointed it at the empty armchair across the room. The viewfinder showed nothing unusual, just the faded floral pattern of the old chair. I pressed the button. The flash momentarily blinded me, and the mechanical whir filled the room. As the photo slowly emerged, my heart raced. I watched, breath held as the image gradually appeared. My gasp echoed in the quiet room. There, sitting in the previously empty armchair, was a dapper gentleman straight out of the early 1900s. He wore a well-tailored suit, a pocket watch chain glinting across his vest. His handlebar mustache was perfectly groomed, and his eyes seemed to stare directly into mine. "Holy shit," I whispered, my hands shaking as I held the photo closer. The man was so clear, so detailed. I could see the pattern of the fabric in his suit, the slight wrinkles around his eyes. He looked as real as if he were sitting in the room with me. I spun around, half expecting to see him in the chair, but it remained empty, the morning sun highlighting the worn spots on the armrests. "Who are you?" I asked the photo, knowing I wouldn't get an answer. "Why are you here?" As if in response, a chill ran through the room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct feeling of being watched. I whirled around, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. Nothing. But the feeling persisted. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it wasn't comforting either. It felt like curiosity. As if whatever, or whoever, I had captured in the photo was now aware of me too. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was a reminder. Meeting with Mr. Burkhart, 1 hour. "Shit," I muttered. I'd almost forgotten about the antique dealer. I looked back at the camera and the growing collection of impossible photos. I needed answers, and hopefully Mr. Burkhart could provide them. I quickly showered and dressed, my mind racing with questions. As I was about to leave, I hesitated. Should I bring the camera? It felt dangerous, like carrying a loaded gun, but I needed to show Mr. Burkhart what was happening. Decision made, I carefully packed the camera and the photos into my bag. The weight of it felt significant, like I was carrying more than just an old Polaroid. The drive to Burkhart's Antiques and Oddities was short, but every shadow on the street seemed to hold secrets. I parked in front of the small, cluttered shop, its windows filled with an eclectic mix of antiques and strange artifacts. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The shop smelled of old books and furniture polish, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place. Incense, maybe? "Mr. Burkhart?" I called out. "In the back, Emma," came the gruff reply. I made my way through the maze of shelves and display cases, finally emerging into a small office area. Mr. Burkhart sat behind a desk covered in papers and odd trinkets. He was older than I remembered, his white hair wild and his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. As I did, his eyes fell on my bag. "You brought it, I see." I nodded, carefully removing the camera and photos. "Mr. Burkhart, what's happening? What is this thing?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That, my dear, is a very long and complicated story, one that your grandmother was deeply involved in." "Grandma Rose? What do you mean?" He picked up the camera, handling it with a familiarity that surprised me. "This camera has been in your family for generations. It's special. It doesn't just capture images of our world, but of the worlds beyond." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Worlds beyond? You mean like ghosts? Spirits? Echoes? Beings from other planes of existence? The veil between worlds is thinner than most people realize, and this camera, it pierces that veil." I showed him the photos I'd taken. His eyes widened as he examined them. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The clarity is astounding. Your connection must be very strong." "My connection? What does that mean?" Mr. Burkhart set the photos down, fixing me with an intense gaze. "The camera doesn't work for just anyone, Emma. It requires a certain sensitivity, a gift that runs in your family line." My mind was reeling. "Are you saying I'm psychic or something?" He chuckled. "Nothing so dramatic, but you have an ability to perceive what others can't. The camera amplifies that ability, allows you to capture it." I thought back to the feeling of being watched after taking the photo of the gentleman. Can they see me too?" Mr. Burkhart's expression grew serious. "Yes, and that's where the danger lies. Every photo you take opens a connection, Most are harmless, merely curious about our world. But some, he trailed off, and I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. Some what? Some are malevolent, angry, and they've been waiting a very long time for someone like you to open the door. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I can't do this. Take it. I don't want it. But as I tried to hand the camera to Mr. Burkhart, it felt like it was glued to my hands. An electric tingle ran up my arms, and for a moment the shop around me seemed to fade. I saw flashes of other places, other times. A bustling street from a century ago. A dark forest, with eyes gleaming between the trees. A vast, starry expanse that couldn't be our sky. "Emma!" Mr. Burkhart's voice snapped me back to reality. I was on my knees, gasping for breath. The camera was clutched tightly to my chest. "What? What was that?" I panted. He helped me back to my chair, his face grim. "That, my dear, was the camera choosing you. I'm afraid there's no going back now. You're part of this, whether you want to be or not." Tears stung my eyes. "I don't understand. Why me? Why now?" Mr. Burkhart sat back down, his expression softening. "Your grandmother knew this day would come. She prepared for it as best she could. This isn't just about taking photos, Emma. It's about maintaining the balance between worlds. Your family has been guardians of that balance for generations." I looked down at the camera in my hands. It no longer felt like just an object. It felt alive, pulsing with potential and danger. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "Learn," Mr. Burkhart said firmly. "Experiment. Understand your abilities and the camera's power. But be cautious. Every photo is a doorway, and you never know what might come through." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. "Your grandmother left this for you. It's a journal of her experiences, her discoveries. It should help guide you." I took the book, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. "And if I need help?" Mr. Burkhart smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "I'm here, and there are others, though they're not easy to find. Trust your instincts, Emma. The camera chose you for a reason." As I left the shop, the world seemed different. Every shadow held potential, every reflection a possible window to another realm. The camera in my bag felt like a ticking time bomb, full of possibility and peril. I got into my car, placing the camera and the journal on the passenger seat. My hand hovered over them, feeling the energy emanating from both. There was no going back to my normal life now. Whatever path lay ahead, it was going to be extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. With a deep breath, I started the car. It was time to go home and truly begin my journey into the unknown. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching me from every corner, every reflective surface. The boundary between worlds had been breached, and I was now the gatekeeper. "All right, Grandma," I said to the empty car. "Let's see what secrets you left for me." The journal seemed to pulse with anticipation, and I knew that my real education was about to begin. The experiment had only just started, and I had a feeling the results would be beyond anything I could imagine. The house felt different when I returned. Shadows seemed deeper, corners darker, and every creak of the old floorboards made me jump. The weight of Grandma Rose's journal in my hands was both comforting and terrifying. I settled into the living room, the Polaroid camera on the coffee table before me, its lens reflecting the warm afternoon light. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered, running my fingers over the worn leather cover of the journal. "Let's see what you left for me." I opened the journal and a slip of paper fluttered out. My heart raced as I recognized Grandma Rose's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then the camera has found its way to you. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on your shoulders, but I know you have the strength to bear it. The truth lies within these pages and the images you capture. Be brave, be wise, and above all, be careful. With all my love, Grandma Rose." Tears pricked my eyes as I read her words. I took a deep breath and began to read. The first few pages were filled with observations about the camera, its weight, the feel of the shutter, the unique scent of the developing chemicals. But as I delved deeper, the entries became more unsettling. May 15, 1975. The woman in the attic appeared again today. She seems distressed, always pointing to the far corner. What is she trying to tell me? June 3, 1975. The gentleman in the study warned me about the shadows. He says they're growing stronger. I don't know what that means, but I'm scared. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Grandma Rose's experiences mirrored my own, but she seemed to have developed a relationship with the spirits she photographed. They communicated with her, warned her. As I reached the middle of the journal, a gasp escaped my lips. There, pressed between the pages, was a photograph I hadn't taken. It showed a young woman, Grandma Rose, I realized with a start, standing in this very living room. Behind her, barely visible, was a dark, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. "Oh my God," I whispered, my heart pounding. I flipped the photo over and found a note scrawled on the back. "The shadows are getting bolder. The camera is both our defense and our danger. Emma, if you're reading this, you must find the source of their power. It all began in Salem. The trials were just the beginning." Salem, the witch trials. Of course, this house, this legacy. It all traced back to that dark chapter in history. But how? And why our family? Lost in thought, I didn't notice the temperature in the room dropping until I could see my breath misting in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and that now familiar feeling of being watched washed over me. Slowly, I raised my eyes from the journal. There, in the doorway, stood a translucent figure of a woman in colonial dress. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was pointing urgently at something behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but saw nothing. When I turned back, the woman was gone. "Wait," I called out, jumping to my feet. "Please, come back. What are you trying to tell me?" Silence answered me, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. I sank back onto the couch, my mind reeling. I hadn't even used the camera this time. Was I starting to see them without it? With shaking hands, I picked up the Polaroid. If spirits were trying to communicate, maybe I could capture their messages. I raised the camera, pointing it at the spot where the colonial woman had stood. Click. Whir. As the photo developed, I held my breath. Slowly an image appeared, the empty doorway, but with words scrawled across it as if written in light. Attic, danger, hurry. My blood ran cold. The attic, where this all began, where I found the camera. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, the camera clutched tightly in my hand. The attic door loomed before me, suddenly more ominous than ever. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and stepped inside. The attic was as I had left it, dusty, cluttered, filled with the accumulated memories of generations. But now, with my newfound awareness, it felt alive with unseen presences. Whispers seemed to echo from the corners, just below the threshold of hearing. I made my way to the trunk where I had found the camera, my flashlight beam dancing across forgotten relics. As I neared it, a glint of metal caught my eye. There, half hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers, was a small key. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was old, ornate, with strange symbols etched into its surface. It hummed with an energy I couldn't explain, as if it had been waiting for me to find it. "What do you unlock?" I murmured, turning the key over in my hands. As if in response, a loud thud came from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding, to see a book had fallen from one of the shelves. It lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. I approached cautiously, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I couldn't stop now. I had to know. The book was old, its leather binding cracked and worn. As I knelt beside it, I saw it was a history of Salem. And there, on the open page, was a familiar name. Hawthorne, my family name. With trembling fingers, I began to read. Among the accusers in the Salem witch trials, none was more fervent than Jeremiah Hawthorne. His testimony led to the conviction and execution of 7 accused witches. But on the night of the final hanging, Jeremiah disappeared. When he returned 3 days later, he was a changed man. He spoke of doors between worlds and a terrible price to be paid for his actions. The Hawthorne family has guarded this secret for generations, keeper of the key that locks the door between realms. My mind reeled. Our family, my family, had been responsible for the deaths of innocent women. And now, generations later, we were tasked with keeping the very forces we had unleashed at bay. A sudden chill ran through me, and I knew I wasn't alone. I raised the camera, my finger on the shutter button, and slowly turned around. Click. Whir. The photo emerged, and as it developed, I felt the blood drain from my face. There, captured in perfect clarity, was a man in Puritan clothing. His eyes burned with a fanatic light, and his outstretched hand seemed to reach out of the photo towards the key I held. Jeremiah Hawthorne, my ancestor, the man who started it all. As I stared at the photo, his lips seemed to move. I leaned closer, my ear almost touching the paper, and heard a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The key, descendant. The door must remain locked. They are coming. A gust of wind whipped through the attic, sending papers flying and extinguishing my flashlight. In the sudden darkness, I heard the creaking of floorboards, as if under the weight of many feet. They were coming. Whatever they were. I clutched the key and the camera to my chest, my heart pounding. I had found the first clue, but it had only led to more questions, more danger. As I stood there in the dark attic, surrounded by the whispers of the past and the approaching threat of the present, I realized that my journey was only beginning. And somewhere, in the shadows, Jeremiah Hawthorne waited, his unfinished business now my burden to bear. "What have you gotten me into, Grandma?" I whispered into the darkness. But I knew, deep down, that I was the only one who could finish what my family had started centuries ago. With a deep breath, I raised the camera once more. Whatever was coming, I would face it head-on, armed with the truth captured in each impossible photograph. Click. Whir. The flash illuminated the attic for a brief moment, revealing shadows that shouldn't exist and faces that time had long forgotten. As the new photo developed in my hands, I steeled myself for whatever revelation it might bring. The door to the past had been opened. Now it was up to me to make sure it didn't unleash hell on the present. The days following my discovery in the attic blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Every shadow, every unexpected sound in the old house set my nerves on edge. The Polaroid camera never left my side, becoming both my weapon and my burden. I sat at the kitchen table, Grandma Rose's journal open before me, the mysterious key lying next to it. Cups of half-drunk cold coffee littered the surface. I hadn't slept properly in days, afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down. "This is insane," I muttered to myself, rubbing my tired eyes. "I can't keep living like this." As if in response to my words, a soft breeze rustled the pages of the journal. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the camera. Slowly, I raised it to my eye, scanning the kitchen through the viewfinder. Click, whir. The photo emerged, and I watched with bated breath as the image developed. My heart skipped a beat as a figure appeared in the frame, a woman dressed in simple, old-fashioned clothes. But unlike the menacing spirits I'd encountered before, her expression was kind, almost maternal. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Who was she? Why did she seem different from the others? Suddenly, words began to appear on the white space below the image, as if an invisible hand was writing them. "Do not be afraid, Emma. My name is Sarah. I'm here to help." My hands trembled as I read the message. "Sarah?" I whispered, looking around the empty kitchen. Are you here now? I grabbed another film and quickly took another photo. As it developed, Sarah's image appeared again, this time with a gentle smile on her face. More words materialized. Yes, child, I've been watching over you. It's time you learned the truth. A mix of relief and apprehension washed over me. Finally, someone who could provide answers. But could I trust her? How do I know you're not like the others? I asked aloud, feeling slightly foolish talking to an empty room. Click. Another photo. I was a victim of the trials, accused by your ancestor. But I don't seek vengeance. I seek balance. The camera chose you for a reason, Emma. I took a shaky breath, processing her words. You knew Jeremiah Hawthorne? Click. Yes. He was misguided, consumed by fear. His actions opened a door that should have remained closed. Now, generations later, that door threatens to burst open. I thought of the key on the table, its strange engravings seeming to pulse in the dim light. And this key? It's connected to that door? Click. Sarah's expression in the new photo was grave. The key is both lock and key, protector and tempter. It holds great power, Emma. Power that others will seek to control. A chill ran down my spine. What others? The shadows? Before I could take another photo, the temperature in the room plummeted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and that now familiar feeling of being watched intensified. But this time it felt different. Warm, almost comforting. I gasped as a translucent figure materialized in front of me. It was Sarah, looking just as she did in the photos, but now I could see her with my own eyes. Sarah? I stammered, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the table. She smiled, her form flickering like a candle flame. Hello, Emma. I thought it was time we spoke face to face. I struggled to find words, my mind reeling from the impossibility of the situation. How are you here? I didn't use the camera. The camera merely amplifies what's already there, Sarah explained, her voice echoing slightly as if coming from a great distance. Your gift is growing stronger, Emma. Soon, you'll be able to see us without it. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This is too much. I didn't ask for any of this. Sarah's expression softened. I know, child. Believe me, I understand the burden that's been placed on you. But you're not alone in this fight. Fight? I echoed, fear creeping into my voice. What fight? Sarah moved closer, and I felt a strange tingling sensation, as if static electricity was dancing across my skin. The veil between worlds is thinning, Emma. The actions of your ancestors created weak points, doors that were never meant to exist. And now, there are forces trying to push through those doors. I thought of the shadowy figures I'd seen, the malevolent presence I'd felt in the attic. The shadows? Sarah nodded gravely. They are but foot soldiers. There are darker things lurking beyond, ancient and hungry. They've been waiting centuries for someone like you. Someone with the power to fully open the doors. My mind was spinning, trying to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. But why me? Why our family? Blood calls to blood, Sarah said softly. The sins of the father, as they say, but also the strength. Your family opened this door, and now it falls to you to close it once and for all. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I'm not some chosen one. I'm just Emma, for God's sake. I can't fight ancient evil or whatever the hell is out there. Sarah remained calm in the face of my outburst. You're more than just Emma. You're the culmination of generations of guardians, whether they knew it or not. The camera chose you for a reason. I paced the kitchen, running my hands through my hair. And what if I refuse? What if I just walk away from all this? Sarah's expression turned sad. Then the doors will open, and what comes through will consume everything. Not just this town, but the world. The barriers between realms will collapse, and reality as you know it will cease to exist. I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders like a physical burden. "No pressure, right?" I said with a weak laugh. Sarah smiled sympathetically. "I know it's overwhelming, but you're stronger than you realize, Emma. And you won't be facing this alone." I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "Okay, let's say I accept this mission. What do I do? Where do I even start?" Sarah's form flickered, and for a moment I was afraid she would disappear. But she steadied, her eyes locking with mine. "First, you need to understand your power. The camera is a tool, but the real strength comes from within you. You need to learn to see beyond the veil without it." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing with the implications. "And then?" "Then we find the doors," Sarah said, her voice taking on a determined edge. "All of them. Your ancestors' journal should have clues. We need to reinforce the weakened points before it's too late." A thought struck me. "The key," I said, picking it up from the table. "It's connected to the doors somehow, isn't it?" Sarah nodded. "It's a skeleton key of sorts. It can lock the doors, or open them fully. That's why it's so dangerous in the wrong hands." I clutched the key tightly, feeling its strange energy pulsing against my palm. "How much time do we have?" Sarah's form began to fade, her energy seemingly depleted. "Not much. The shadows grow stronger every day. You need to—" But before she could finish, a loud crash came from upstairs. Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "They're here," she whispered. "Emma, you need to—" Her form dissipated completely, leaving me alone in the suddenly dark kitchen. The crash came again, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. My heart pounding, I grabbed the camera and the key, shoving them into my pockets. I looked around frantically for a weapon, settling on a heavy iron skillet from the stove. As the footsteps drew closer, descending the stairs, I pressed myself against the wall next to the kitchen door. The temperature dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath misting in the air. A shadow fell across the doorway, impossibly large and distorted. I gripped the skillet tightly, my palms sweaty. This was it. The moment everything changed. I was no longer just Emma, the girl who inherited her grandmother's house. I was Emma Hawthorne, reluctant guardian of the veil between worlds. As the shadow loomed closer, I steeled myself for what was to come. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "You're stronger than you realize." I took a deep breath, raised the skillet, and prepared to face whatever nightmare was about to step through that door. The fight for reality itself was about to begin, and I was the only one standing in the way of utter chaos. "Bring it on," I whispered as the door began to open. The kitchen door creaked open, revealing nothing. The hallway beyond was empty, shadows dancing on the walls from the flickering overhead light. I stood frozen, skillet raised, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "What the hell?" I whispered, lowering the makeshift weapon slightly. That's when I saw it. A dark, oily substance seeping under the door, spreading across the kitchen floor like spilled ink. The temperature plummeted further, frost crystallizing on the windows. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the counter. "No, no, no," I muttered, watching in horror as the substance began to take shape. It rose from the floor, a writhing mass of darkness that vaguely resembled a human form. Where its face should have been, there were only swirling voids, punctuated by pinpricks of cold, blue light. "Emma Hawthorne," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "We've been waiting for you." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you?" The creature's form rippled, expanding to fill more of the kitchen. "We are the shadows between worlds, the whispers in the dark. We are what your ancestors feared, what they tried to lock away." My mind raced, remembering Sarah's warnings. This was what she meant by darker things lurking beyond. I gripped the skillet tighter, though I doubted it would do much good against this thing. "What do you want?" I demanded, proud that my voice only shook a little. The creature's laughter was like breaking glass. What everyone wants, little guardian, freedom, power, and you're going to give it to us. It lunged forward, tendrils of darkness reaching for me. I swung the skillet wildly, feeling it pass through the creature's form like it was made of smoke. Cold seeped into my bones where the shadows touched me. "The key," it hissed. "Give us the key." I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers closing around the ancient key. It pulsed with warmth, a stark contrast to the bone-chilling cold of the kitchen. "Never," I spat, backing away towards the door. The creature's form solidified, becoming more humanoid. I could make out features now, a twisted mockery of a face with 2 sharp teeth and a too wide mouth. "You don't know what you're dealing with, girl," it snarled. "We've waited centuries for this moment. Do you think you can stop us?" I felt a surge of defiance. "I can damn well try." I turned and ran, bolting out of the kitchen and up the stairs. The creature's roar of fury shook the house, picture frames rattling on the walls. I could hear it pursuing me, its form melting and reforming as it oozed up the staircase. I burst into my bedroom, slamming the door shut and pushing a heavy dresser in front of it. My hands shook as I pulled out the Polaroid camera. "Sarah!" I called out, desperation in my voice. "Sarah, I need you!" I raised the camera, pointing it at the empty room. Click, whir. The photo emerged, but as it developed, my heart sank. The image showed only my empty bedroom, no sign of Sarah or any other benevolent spirit. A heavy thud against the door made me jump. The dresser scraped against the floor as the creature pushed against it. "You can't hide from us, Emma." Its voice seeped through the cracks in the door. "We are everywhere the light doesn't touch." As if to emphasize its point, the shadows in the room began to deepen and move. I watched in horror as they peeled away from the walls, coalescing into smaller versions of the creature downstairs. I backed up until I hit the window, the cool glass a shock against my skin. The shadow creatures advanced slowly, savoring my fear. "The key, Emma," they whispered in unison. "Give us the key, and this can all be over." I clutched the key tightly, feeling its warmth spread up my arm. "Over for who?" I shot back. "For me, or for the world?" The largest shadow, the one that had chased me upstairs, chuckled darkly. "Smart girl. But do you really think you can bear this burden? Do you think you're strong enough to keep us at bay forever?" Doubt crept into my mind. It was right. I was just one person. How could I possibly stand against forces that had existed for centuries? But then I remembered Sarah's words. "You're stronger than you realize." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Maybe I'm not strong enough yet," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But I'm sure as hell not giving up without a fight." I raised the camera again, this time pointing it directly at the advancing shadows. Click. Whir. The flash was blinding, far brighter than it should have been. The shadow creatures recoiled, hissing in pain. When my vision cleared, I looked at the developing photo. The image showed the room as it was, full of writhing shadows, but overlaid on the scene were glowing symbols, similar to the ones etched on the key. They formed a protective circle around where I stood. Understanding dawned on me. The camera wasn't just for seeing the unseen, it was a weapon. With renewed determination, I began snapping photos rapidly, each flash driving the shadows back. They shrieked in fury and pain, their forms dissipating under the onslaught of light. "This isn't over, Guardian," the main creature snarled as it retreated. "We'll be back, and next time you won't be so lucky." With a final ear-splitting screech, the shadows vanished, seeping back into the corners of the room and under the door. The temperature slowly began to rise, and I could hear birds chirping outside as if nothing had happened. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, breathing heavily. My hands shook as I looked through the photos I'd taken. Each one showed a different aspect of the shadow creatures, their true forms captured in terrifying detail. "Oh God," I whispered, the reality of what had just happened crashing down on me. "This is real. This is really happening." A soft glow caught my attention. I looked up to see Sarah materializing in the center of the room, her form more solid than before. "You did well, Emma," she said, her voice filled with pride and concern. But this was only the beginning. I struggled to my feet, leaning against the wall for support. "They'll be back, won't they?" Sarah nodded gravely. "Yes, and in greater numbers. They know you're a threat now. They'll stop at nothing to get the key and open the doors between worlds." I held up the camera. "At least now I know I can fight back. But Sarah, I can't do this alone. I need help." Sarah's expression softened. "You're not alone, Emma. There are others like you, guardians, protectors. We need to find them." A thought struck me. "Mr. Burkhart," I said. "The antique dealer. He knew about the camera, about all of this. Could he be one of these guardians?" "It's possible," Sarah mused. "Many have played a part in keeping the balance over the years, some knowingly, others unknowingly." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "Okay. First thing tomorrow, we go see Mr. Burkhart. Maybe he can point us towards others who can help." Sarah smiled approvingly. "A wise decision. But Emma, you need to be careful. The shadows will be watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike." I glanced at the photos scattered on the floor, the terrifying images a stark reminder of what I was up against. "I'll be ready for them," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As Sarah's form began to fade, she fixed me with an intense gaze. "Remember, Emma, the camera is a tool, but the real power lies within you. Trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to push your boundaries." With those final words, she disappeared, leaving me alone in the suddenly quiet room. I looked down at the key in my hand, then at the camera, two objects that had turned my world upside down in a matter of days. But as terrifying as it all was, I couldn't deny the thrill of purpose that ran through me. I was Emma Hawthorne, reluctant guardian of the veil between worlds, and I had a job to do. As I began to clean up the mess from the shadow attack, my mind raced with questions and possibilities. What other secrets did my family history hold? Who were the other guardians Sarah mentioned? And most importantly, how long did we have before the shadows launched their next assault? One thing was certain: my life would never be the same. But as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A determination in my eyes, a set to my jaw that spoke of newfound strength. "Bring it on," I whispered to my reflection. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Little did I know, the true tests of my resolve were yet to come. The darker side of this new reality was just beginning to reveal itself, and I would need every ounce of courage and strength to face what lay ahead. The early morning light filtered through the dusty attic windows as I rifled through old boxes and trunks. After the shadow attack, sleep had been impossible. Instead, I'd spent the night fortifying the house with makeshift wards, salt lines at the windows and doors, protective symbols hastily drawn with chalk. Now, as dawn broke, I was on a mission. "There has to be more," I muttered, pushing aside a stack of yellowed newspapers. Grandma wouldn't have left me with just the camera and the journal. As if in response to my words, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic at the bottom of an old steamer trunk. My heart raced as I pulled out a small ornate box. It was made of tarnished silver, covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the key. "Bingo," I whispered, turning the box over in my hands. The lock was intricate, unlike anything I'd seen before. On a hunch, I pulled out the key from my pocket. It fit perfectly. With a deep breath, I turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the attic. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a stack of documents. My hands trembled as I picked up the first one, a letter, dated 1692. "Oh my God," I breathed, recognizing the significance of the date, the height of the Salem witch trials. I began to read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "My dearest Elizabeth, I write to you in the darkest hour of my life. What we have done here in Salem is an abomination. In our fear and ignorance, we have opened a door that should have remained forever closed. The trials were a sham, a cover for something far more sinister. The true witches, the real danger, used our hysteria to mask their own dark rituals. As I write this, I can feel the veil between worlds thinning, shadows seeping through cracks in reality itself. I was a fool, blinded by my own righteousness. I condemned innocent women to death, and in doing so I have damned us all. The power unleashed by their unjust executions has torn holes in the fabric of our world. Elizabeth, my love, I fear I may not return from what I must do next. Know that everything I do now is in an attempt to right the wrongs I have committed. The burden of watching the door will fall to our family. I pray that someday, somehow, our line will produce one strong enough to close it for good. May God have mercy on our souls. Your devoted husband, Jeremiah Hawthorne. I sat back, my mind reeling from the implications of what I'd just read. Holy shit, I whispered, the weight of my family's legacy pressing down on me like a physical force. Now you understand. Sarah's voice came from behind me, making me jump. I turned to see her spectral form hovering near the attic door. Understand what? I asked, my voice hoarse. That my family is responsible for unleashing hell on earth? Sarah shook her head, moving closer. No, Emma. Your family has been trying to contain that hell for generations. Jeremiah made a terrible mistake, yes, but he spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. I looked back at the letter, then at the other documents in the box. So all this time the Hawthorns have been what? The secret guardians of some mystical door between worlds? Not just guardians, Sarah said, her voice taking on a reverent tone. Sentinels, warriors, protectors of the veil. Your grandmother was one of the strongest in generations. A lump formed in my throat at the mention of Grandma Rose. She never told me any of this. Sarah's expression softened. She wanted to protect you, to give you a normal life for as long as possible. But she also prepared you, in her own way. The camera, the journal, they were her way of easing you into your legacy. I shook my head, overwhelmed. Some legacy. A family curse and a war against shadow monsters. It's more than that, Emma, Sarah insisted. Your family has been instrumental in keeping the darkness at bay for centuries. Without the Hawthorns, the world as we know it might not exist. I stood up, pacing the small, clear area of the attic. Okay, let's say I accept all this. What am I supposed to do now? I'm not prepared for this kind of responsibility. Sarah watched me with sympathy in her eyes. No one ever is at first, but you're stronger than you realize, Emma. The power in your blood, dormant for so long, is awakening. As if to emphasize her point, the key in my hand began to glow faintly. I stared at it in wonder, feeling a warm energy pulsing through my palm. What's happening? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The key is responding to you, Sarah explained. It recognizes you as a true Hawthorne, a guardian of the veil. I looked from the key to the documents, then back to Sarah. I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm going to do this, I need to understand what I'm up against. Sarah nodded solemnly. Of course, but Emma, be warned. Some knowledge comes at a price. Are you sure you're ready? I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I have to be. For Grandma Rose. For all the Hawthorns who came before me. I need to know. Very well, Sarah said. She gestured to the box of documents. The answers you seek are in there. Your family's history, the true nature of the doors, the rituals used to keep them closed. It's all there. I sat back down, pulling the box closer. Will you stay with me while I read through these? Sarah smiled warmly. Of course. I'll help you understand what I can. For the next several hours, I pored over the documents. Birth certificates, death records, personal journals, and arcane texts filled with symbols and incantations I couldn't begin to comprehend. With each page, the true scope of my family's involvement in the supernatural world became clearer. I learned of great-great-aunts who had battled demonic entities in the forests of New England, of uncles who had traveled the world closing weak points in the veil. I read accounts of rituals performed under full moons and in sacred groves, all aimed at reinforcing the barriers between worlds. But most chilling were the descriptions of what lay beyond those barriers. Creatures of shadow and flame, beings of such cosmic horror that merely glimpsing them could drive a person mad. The hawthorns had been the thin line keeping these nightmares at bay for generations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the attic, I finally set down the last document. My head was spinning with information, my worldview irrevocably altered. It's too much, I said, my voice cracking. How am I supposed to live up to this legacy? Sarah, who had remained a constant comforting presence throughout my research, moved closer. You don't have to do it all at once, Emma. Every guardian starts somewhere. Your grandmother didn't become a powerful protector overnight. I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But the shadows are getting stronger. You said it yourself. We don't have much time. Then we start small, Sarah said firmly. You've already proven you can fight back. Now we build on that strength. I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles. As I did, my gaze fell on an old mirror leaning against the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in its reflection, a flicker of shadow that didn't match the room around me. Sarah, I said slowly, not taking my eyes off the mirror. Is it possible for the shadows to watch us through reflections? Sarah's expression turned grave. Yes, mirrors, still water, even the glassy surface of an eye, they can all be windows for those who know how to look. A chill ran down my spine. Then they've been watching this whole time. They know what I know. Likely, Sarah admitted. But knowledge goes both ways, Emma. Now you know more about them too. And knowledge in this war is power. I turned away from the mirror, my resolve hardening. Then we use that power. You said there were others like me, other guardians. It's time we found them. Sarah nodded approvingly. A wise decision. But be careful, Emma. Not all who claim to be allies are trustworthy. The shadows have agents in this world wearing human faces. Great, I muttered, as if this wasn't complicated enough already. I looked down at the key in my hand, then at the camera sitting on a nearby trunk. At least I have these. They've kept me alive so far. They're tools, Emma, Sarah reminded me. Powerful ones, yes, but the real strength lies within you. Never forget that. As we made our way down from the attic, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive. But instead of the paralyzing fear I'd felt before, I now felt a spark of defiance. I was Emma Hawthorne, heir to a legacy of guardians and protectors. I had faced down shadow creatures and glimpsed the terrifying truths that lay beyond our world. And I was just getting started. All right, you bastards, I muttered to the lurking shadows. You want a war? Let's have a war. The journey ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges I could scarcely imagine. But for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to face them. The family secret was out, and with it my true purpose had been revealed. The battle for the veil between worlds was about to begin in earnest. And I, Emma Hawthorne, reluctant guardian and last of my line, would be on the front lines. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the overgrown garden behind my grandmother's house. I stood at the center of a hastily drawn circle, surrounded by candles flickering in the gentle night breeze. My hands trembled as I clutched Sarah's hastily scribbled instructions. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's spectral form hovered just outside the circle, her expression a mix of concern and determination. It's our best chance, Emma. The cleansing ritual will strengthen the barriers and push back the shadows, at least for a while. I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Okay, let's do this. I began gathering the items Sarah had insisted were necessary, A silver bowl filled with water from a natural spring, a handful of herbs from Grandma Rose's garden, the mysterious key that had started it all, and, of course, the Polaroid camera. As I arranged everything within the circle, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. "This feels like something out of a bad horror movie," I muttered. Sarah's laugh was like wind chimes in the night air. "Many rituals do, I'm afraid. But don't let appearances fool you. There's real power in these old ways." I struck a match, lighting a bundle of sage. The pungent smoke curled around me, and I felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the very atmosphere was becoming charged with potential. "Remember," Sarah said, her voice taking on a serious tone, "the words are important, but it's your intent that truly matters. Focus on protection, on strengthening the veil between worlds." I nodded, raising the sage bundle and beginning to walk the perimeter of the circle. As I moved, I recited the words Sarah had taught me, my voice growing stronger with each step. "By earth and air, by fire and sea, I call upon the powers that be. Strengthen the veil, protect this place, keep the shadows from this space." As I completed the circle, a gust of wind swept through the garden, causing the candles to flicker wildly. For a moment I feared they would go out, but instead they burned brighter, their flames stretching unnaturally high. "Good," Sarah encouraged. "Now, the key." I picked up the ancient key, its metal warm against my palm. Following Sarah's instructions, I dipped it into the bowl of spring water, watching as ripples spread across the surface. "With this key I lock the door," I intoned, my voice resonating with a power I didn't fully understand. "Between the worlds, a barrier more. What was opened, now I seal. Let no darkness cross or steal." The water in the bowl began to glow faintly, a soft blue light emanating from its depths. I felt a surge of energy course through me, making my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. "It's working," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. But as the words left her lips, a bone-chilling howl cut through the night air. The shadows at the edge of the garden began to writhe and twist, taking on monstrous shapes. "They're here," I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah's form flickered, her expression grim. "They're trying to stop the ritual. Emma, you must complete it no matter what happens." I nodded, gripping the key tighter as I continued the incantation. The shadows grew more substantial, clawing at the edges of my protective circle. I could hear whispers on the wind, promises of power and threats of unimaginable horrors. "Your fate was sealed centuries ago, Hawthorne." A voice like grinding stones hissed. "You cannot undo what your ancestors have wrought." I faltered for a moment, doubt creeping into my mind. What if they were right? What if this was all futile? "Don't listen to them, Emma." Sarah's voice cut through my fears. "They're desperate. It means the ritual is working. Drawing strength from her words, I pressed on, my voice rising above the cacophony of whispers and howls. By the blood of my line, by the power in my veins, I reinforced the barriers, I strengthened the chains. What was weakened, I now restore. Shadows be gone. Trouble us no more." As I spoke the final words, I plunged the key into the glowing water. A blinding flash of light erupted from the bowl, expanding outward in a shockwave that rippled through the air. The shadows screamed, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the garden lifted, replaced by a sense of lightness and clarity. For a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, the glow from the water faded and the candles returned to their normal size. I stood there, panting, my body drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. Did it work?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Sarah moved closer, her form more solid than I'd ever seen it. "Yes, Emma, you did it. The barriers are stronger now, the shadows pushed back." I sank to my knees, exhaustion washing over me. Why do I feel like I just ran a marathon? "Magic always comes at a cost," Sarah explained gently. "You've expended a great deal of energy tonight." As the adrenaline began to fade, I noticed something odd. The key, still submerged in the bowl of water, was glowing faintly. And as I watched, strange symbols began to etch themselves into its surface. "Sarah, look," I said, carefully lifting the key from the water. Her eyes widened as she examined it. "The key has been changed by the ritual. It's evolving. What does that mean for us?" Before Sarah could answer, a new voice cut through the night, making us both jump. "It means, my dear, that you've just painted a giant target on your back." I spun around to see an elderly man standing at the edge of the garden. His white hair was wild, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. It took me a moment to recognize him. "Mr. Burkhart?" I gasped. The antique dealer nodded, his expression grave. I felt the surge of power from across town. I had hoped I was wrong, that it wasn't you. But it seems the Hawthorne legacy has awakened at last. I struggled to my feet, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. "How did you... What are you doing here?" Mr. Burkhart stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the glowing key in my hand. "I'm here, Emma, because what you've just done has sent ripples through the supernatural world. Every being with an ounce of magical sensitivity will have felt that ritual, and many of them will be coming for you." A chill ran down my spine. "Coming for me? Why?" "Because, my dear, you've just proven yourself to be a formidable guardian. To some, that makes you a potential ally. To others, a threat that needs to be eliminated." Sarah moved protectively closer to me. "Emma is under my protection," she said, her voice carrying a hint of steel. "Mr." Burkhart raised an eyebrow. "A spectral guardian? Interesting, but I'm afraid it won't be enough, not for what's coming." I looked between Sarah and Mr. Burkhart, feeling overwhelmed. "What do you mean, what's coming?" "I thought the ritual was supposed to push the shadows back." "It did," Mr. Burkhart said with a sigh. "But in doing so, you've disrupted a delicate balance. The shadows will regroup, and they'll come back stronger, and they're not the only forces at play here." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old leather-bound book. "Your grandmother left this with me for safekeeping. I think it's time you had it." With trembling hands, I took the book. As soon as my fingers touched the cover, I felt a jolt of recognition. This book belonged to me, had always belonged to me, even though I'd never seen it before. "What is it?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "It's a grimoire," Mr. Burkhart explained. "A book of shadows passed down through your family line. It contains knowledge and spells that will help you in the battles to come." I opened the book, leafing through pages filled with intricate diagrams, arcane symbols, and handwritten notes from generations of Hawthorns. It was overwhelming, yet somehow familiar. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Mr. Burkhart. "How do you know all this? Who are you, really?" The old man's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Let's just say I'm a friend of the family. I've been watching over the Hawthorns for, well, longer than you'd believe. But now it's time for you to take up the mantle, Emma. The world needs you." As if to emphasize his point, a distant howl echoed through the night, sending shivers down my spine. The shadows might have been pushed back, but they weren't gone. And according to Mr. Burkhart, they were just the beginning. I looked down at the key in one hand, the grimoire in the other, then back at Sarah and Mr. Burkhart. In the span of a few days, my world had been turned upside down. I'd gone from a normal girl to a guardian of the veil between worlds, with powers I barely understood, and enemies I could scarcely imagine. But as terrifying as it all was, I felt a sense of purpose settling over me. This was my legacy, my destiny, and I would face it head-on. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "What's our next move?" Mr. Burkhart smiled, a mix of pride and worry in his eyes. "Now, my dear, we prepare for war. The ritual was just the beginning. The real battle is about to begin." As we made our way back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The ritual had changed everything for better or worse. And I, Emma Hawthorne, was at the center of it all. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, filled with dangers I could scarcely imagine. But I wasn't alone. With Sarah's guidance, Mr. Burkhart's knowledge, and the power of my ancestors flowing through my veins, I would face whatever came next. The night wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of challenges to come. But for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to meet them. The morning after the ritual dawned cold and gray, a thick fog blanketing the town of Salem. I stood at the kitchen window, clutching a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, my eyes scanning the mist-shrouded street for any sign of the supernatural threats Mr. Burkhart had warned about. "You need to rest, Emma." Sarah's voice came from behind me. "You've been standing there for hours." I turned to face her spectral form, noticing how it seemed more substantial in the wake of last night's ritual. "I can't rest," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Not when I don't know what's coming." Mr. Burkhart, who had insisted on staying the night to keep watch, entered the kitchen. His eyes were tired but alert. "Sarah's right. You'll be no good to anyone if you're exhausted." I sighed, setting down the mug. "Fine. But first, I want to try something." I picked up the Polaroid camera from where it sat on the kitchen table. Since the ritual, it had been humming with an energy I couldn't quite explain. I raised it to my eye, pointing it at the empty space next to Mr. Burkhart. Click. Whir. As the photo developed, I felt a surge of excitement. The image showed not just Mr. Burkhart, but a swirling aura of golden light surrounding him. Symbols and sigils floated in the air around his head, reminiscent of the ones I'd seen in the family grimoire. "It worked," I breathed. "The camera. It's different now. Enhanced." Mr. Burkhart examined the photo, his eyebrows raised. "Fascinating. The ritual seems to have amplified its abilities. It's not just capturing the unseen now, it's revealing the very essence of magical energy." Sarah peered at the image. "This could be incredibly useful, Emma, but also dangerous in the wrong hands." I nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension churning in my stomach. "I need to test it more, see what else it can do." "Later," Mr. Burkhart said firmly. "For now, you need to sleep. I'll keep watch." Reluctantly, I agreed, making my way upstairs to my bedroom. As I lay down, I placed the camera on the nightstand, within easy reach, just in case. Sleep came quickly, but it was far from peaceful. My dreams were a chaotic swirl of shadows and light, whispered warnings and muffled screams. I saw faces in the darkness, some familiar, others terrifyingly alien. And through it all, a sense of impending doom, of a balance irrevocably shifted. I woke with a start, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment I was disoriented, the events of the past few days feeling like a distant nightmare. Then I saw the camera on the nightstand and reality came crashing back. As I sat up, I noticed something odd. The air in the room seemed different, thicker somehow, charged with an energy I could almost taste. On impulse, I grabbed the camera and took a photo of the empty room. The image that developed made my blood run cold. The seemingly empty space was actually teeming with ethereal forms, wispy creatures that floated just at the edge of perception. And at the center of it all, a tear in the very fabric of reality, glowing with an otherworldly light. "Oh God," I whispered. "What have I done?" I raced downstairs, nearly colliding with Mr. Burkhart in the hallway. "Emma, thank goodness you're awake," he said, his face grave. "We have a situation." Before I could respond, a scream pierced the air, coming from outside. We rushed to the front door, throwing it open to a scene of chaos. The quiet street I'd grown up on was unrecognizable. People were running in panic, their eyes wide with terror as they pointed at things I couldn't see. Cars swerved erratically, their drivers battling invisible forces, and everywhere shadows writhed and pulsed, taking on monstrous forms before dissipating back into formlessness. "What's happening?" I gasped, my heart pounding. Mr. Burkhart's voice was grim. "The backlash. The ritual didn't just strengthen the barriers, Emma. It thinned the veil between worlds. Reality itself is becoming unstable. As if to emphasize his point, a nearby tree suddenly burst into flames, its branches twisting into grotesque, reaching arms before crumbling to ash. "We need to do something," I cried, raising the camera instinctively. Click. Whir. The photo that emerged showed the street as it truly was, a battleground between our world and another. Creatures of shadow and light clashed in the air, while rifts in space-time opened and closed like pulsing wounds. "The camera," Mr. Burkhart breathed. "It's not just showing us what's happening, it's stabilizing things somehow." I looked at him, an idea forming. "Then we use it. We find the weak points and, I don't know, photograph them closed?" He nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "It's worth a try. But be careful, Emma. Each photo you take is changing reality. There could be unforeseen consequences." We set out into the chaos, Sarah floating beside us, her form flickering with the fluctuations in the veil. I raised the camera again and again, each flash momentarily calming the madness around us. Click. Whir. A group of shadow creatures dissipated. Click. Whir. A rift in space sealed shut. Click. Whir. A car, about to crash into a group of terrified pedestrians, suddenly found itself on an empty street. But with each photo, I felt a strain, as if the camera was drawing energy directly from me. My vision began to blur, my hands shaking with exhaustion. "Emma, look out!" Sarah's cry came too late. A tendril of pure darkness lashed out, knocking the camera from my hands. It clattered to the ground, the lens cracking on impact. I dove for it, but another shadow creature blocked my path, its form solidifying into a nightmarish amalgamation of teeth and claws. "You meddlesome child," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Did you think you could reshape reality without consequences?" I backed away, my mind racing for a solution. Mr. Burkhart stepped in front of me, his hands glowing with arcane energy. "Stay back, creature of the void. You have no power here." The shadow laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Power? We are power, old man, and this world will be ours." It lunged forward, but Mr. Burkhart was faster. He threw up a barrier of golden light, momentarily holding the creature at bay. "Emma, the camera. It's our only chance." I scrambled for the Polaroid, my fingers closing around its familiar shape. The cracked lens sparkled with an inner light, and I knew instinctively what I had to do. Raising the damaged camera, I pointed it not at the shadow creature, but at myself and Mr. Burkhart. "I hope this works," I muttered. Click. Whir. The flash was blinding, far brighter than it should have been. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, reality itself seemed to ripple, like a stone thrown into a pond. When my vision cleared, the street was empty save for confused-looking residents emerging from their homes. The shadow creatures were gone, the rifts closed. Everything looked normal. Mr. Burkhart stared at me in awe. "Emma, what did you do?" I looked down at the photo in my hands. It showed Mr. Burkhart and me, but surrounded by a swirling vortex of energy, our forms blurred as if in motion. I think I reset things. Pushed reality back to how it was supposed to be. Sarah materialized next to us, her expression a mix of pride and concern. "You did more than that, Emma. You've merged with the camera's power. Look at yourself." I glanced down and gasped. My skin was glowing faintly, symbols like those in the grimoire dancing across my arms before fading away. "What's happening to me?" I whispered, a note of fear in my voice. Mr. Burkhart placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're evolving, my dear. The power of your bloodline, awakened by the ritual and amplified by the camera, it's changing you." I looked around at the now peaceful street, then back at the photo in my hands. "Is this permanent?" "I don't know," Mr. Burkhart admitted. We're in uncharted territory now. But one thing's for certain, you've become more than just a guardian, Emma. You're a nexus point between worlds. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had set out to protect my town, to honor my family's legacy. Instead, I had fundamentally altered the nature of reality itself. As we made our way back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The shadows had been pushed back, yes, but at what cost? And what new challenges would arise from the changes I had wrought? One thing was clear. My journey as a guardian had taken an unexpected turn. I was no longer just defending the veil between worlds. I had become a part of it. The cracked Polaroid camera hung heavy around my neck, a reminder of the power I now wielded and the responsibility that came with it. As we stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a mirror. For a moment, I saw not just myself, but countless other versions. Past, present, and future Emmas, all connected by a thread of destiny I was only beginning to understand. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Burkhart's expression was solemn. "Now, my dear, we prepare. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this. The universe abhors a vacuum, and you've just created one hell of a power vacuum." As if in response to his words, the symbols on my skin flared to life once more, a silent testament to the challenges that lay ahead. The backlash had been weathered, but the true test was yet to come. The days following the reality-altering event blurred together in a haze of preparation and trepidation. My newfound powers fluctuated wildly. One moment I could see through the veil as easily as breathing. The next I was as blind as any normal human. The cracked Polaroid camera hung around my neck like an anchor, a constant reminder of the responsibility I now bore. Mr. Burkhart had taken up permanent residence in my grandmother's study, poring over ancient texts and muttering incantations. Sarah flickered in and out of visibility, her spectral form seemingly affected by the shifts in reality. It was on the 7th day that everything changed. I was in the attic, practicing a containment spell from the family grimoire, when a bone-chilling howl tore through the air. The windows rattled in their frames, and a sense of dread washed over me like a physical force. "Emma," Mr. Burkhart's voice called from downstairs. "It's time." My heart pounding, I raced down to find him standing in the living room, his face grave. Sarah materialized beside him, her form more solid than I'd seen in days. "What's happening?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Mr. Burkhart's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "The shadows have rallied. They're making their final push." As if on cue, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Outside, an unnatural twilight descended, turning midday into midnight in a matter of seconds. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "What's the plan?" "We need to reach the focal point," Sarah said, her voice echoing strangely in the darkened room. "The place where the veil is thinnest. If we conceal it there, we might be able to push them back for good." Mr. Burkhart nodded grimly. "The old cemetery, where the accused witches were buried. It's where this all began, and it's where it must end." I gripped the camera tightly, feeling its power pulse in sync with my racing heart. "Let's go." We stepped out into a world transformed. The streets of Salem were empty, an eerie silence broken only by the distant sound of inhuman shrieks. Shadows writhed along the ground, reaching out with tendrils of darkness that seemed to drink in what little light remained. As we made our way towards the cemetery, I raised the camera, its cracked lens glinting in the strange half-light. Click. Whir. The photo that emerged showed more than just the deserted street. Overlaid on the image were lines of force, ley lines pulsing with ethereal energy. They all converged on a single point, the old cemetery. "We're on the right track," I said, showing them the photo. Mr. Burkhart's eyes widened. "Remarkable. The camera is showing us the very fabric of reality." We pressed on, each step feeling like we were wading through molasses. The air grew thicker, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. As we neared the cemetery gates, a figure materialized before us, blocking our path. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the face from the old family photos. "Jeremiah Hawthorne," I whispered. The spectral form of my ancestor regarded us with eyes that burned with an inner fire. "So, the prodigal daughter returns," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "Have you come to undo my work, child?" I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've come to finish what you started, to close the door you opened." Jeremiah's laugh was like breaking glass. "Foolish girl, do you think it's that simple? The power I unleashed cannot be contained. It is eternal, unyielding." "Maybe not by you," I shot back, feeling a surge of defiance. "But I'm not just a Hawthorne. I'm something new." As if to emphasize my point, the symbols on my skin flared to life, glowing with an inner light that pushed back the encroaching shadows. Jeremiah's form flickered, a look of uncertainty crossing his face. "What have you become?" Before I could answer, a deafening roar split the air. The gates of the cemetery burst open, and a tide of darkness poured forth. Shadow creatures of every description swarmed towards us, their forms twisting and melding in a nightmarish dance. "Emma, now!" Mr. Burkhart shouted, throwing up a barrier of golden light that barely held back the onslaught. I raised the camera, my finger on the shutter button. Time seemed to slow as I looked through the cracked viewfinder. I could see everything. The ley lines converging, the weak points in the veil, the very fabric of reality straining at the seams. Click. Whir. The flash was blinding, a supernova of pure creation that pushed back the darkness. For a moment the world held its breath. Then, reality itself seemed to shudder. The photo that emerged was unlike anything I'd seen before. It showed not just the physical world, but the spiritual one layered on top of it. And at the center of it all was a swirling vortex of energy, the door between worlds. "It's not enough," Sarah cried, her form flickering as she struggled to maintain her presence. "The door's too strong." Jeremiah's laugh rang out again, tinged with madness. "You see? It cannot be undone. The shadows will consume all." But as I stared at the photo, something clicked in my mind. I understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, what I had to do. "You're wrong," I said, my voice ringing with newfound power. "It can be undone, but not by closing the door." Mr. Burkhart looked at me, confusion and fear warring on his face. "Emma, what are you saying?" I met his gaze, a sad smile on my lips. "The door can't be closed because it's meant to be open. Just not like this." Before anyone could stop me, I strode forward, pushing past Jeremiah's spectral form and into the heart of the shadow swarm. The darkness parted before me, creatures of nightmare recoiling from the light that emanated from my skin. I reached the center of the cemetery, where the vortex of energy raged. I could feel it pulling at me, trying to tear me apart at a molecular level, but I stood firm, raising the camera one last time. "Emma, no." Sarah's cry was lost in the howling wind. Click, whir. The world exploded in light. I felt myself being torn apart and remade, my consciousness expanding to encompass realities I could never have imagined. I saw the beginning and end of all things, the intricate web of cause and effect that tied all of existence together. And in that moment of infinite understanding, I made my choice. When the light faded, the cemetery was quiet. The shadows were gone, but so was the oppressive darkness that had hung over the town. In its place was a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from everything: the trees, the stones, even the air itself. Mr. Burkhart and Sarah rushed to where I stood, their faces a mixture of awe and concern. "Emma," Mr. Burkhart's voice was hesitant. "What did you do?" I turned to face them, knowing that my appearance had changed. My body glowed with the same ethereal light that now suffused the world. symbols and sigils dancing across my skin in an ever-changing pattern. "I didn't close the door," I said, my voice resonating with newfound power. "I became the door." Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. "You've merged with the veil itself." I nodded, feeling the weight of worlds on my shoulders. The shadows can't break through anymore because there's nothing to break through. The barriers between worlds are gone, but so is the conflict. Everything is imbalanced. Jeremiah's spirit approached, his form more solid now, the madness gone from his eyes. "You've done what I could not," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and regret. "You've brought harmony to chaos." I looked around at the transformed world, seeing it with new eyes. The veil was gone, but reality hadn't collapsed. Instead, it had expanded, encompassing all the wonders and terrors that had once been hidden. "It's not over," I said, knowing the truth of my words. "This is just the beginning. The world will need guidance, protection. They'll need to understand this new reality." Mr. Burkhart stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "And they'll have it. You're not alone in this, Emma. We'll face this new world together." Sarah nodded in agreement, her form now as solid as any living person's. The Hawthorne legacy continues, but in a way none of us could have imagined. As the sun began to rise on this new world, I felt a sense of purpose unlike anything I'd ever known. The Polaroid camera, now fused with my very being, was no longer just a tool for seeing the unseen. It was a symbol of the balance I now embodied, the bridge between all realities. "Well then," I said, a smile playing on my lips, "I guess we have work to do." And with that, we stepped out into the dawn of a new era, ready to face whatever challenges this transformed world might bring. The final confrontation had ended, but our true journey was just beginning. The sun rose on a world forever changed. As the first rays of dawn touched the transformed landscape of Salem, I stood atop the hill overlooking the town, my new form shimmering with ethereal energy. The weight of what I had become, a living bridge between worlds, settled over me like a mantle. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, her now solid form standing beside me. "And terrifying." I nodded, watching as the townspeople began to emerge from their homes, blinking in confusion at the new reality that surrounded them. "They're going to need help understanding all of this," I said, my voice resonating with a power I was still coming to terms with. Mr. Burkhart joined us, his weathered face etched with a mixture of awe and concern. "Indeed they will, and not just here in Salem. The effects of what you've done, Emma, will ripple out across the globe." As if to emphasize his point, my enhanced senses picked up flashes of chaos and wonder from around the world. In New York, spirits danced among the skyscrapers. In Tokyo, ancient yokai walked the streets alongside businessmen. In the Amazon rainforest, long-forgotten gods stirred from their slumber. "We should start here," I said, gesturing to Salem below us. "This is where it all began. If we can help them understand, maybe we can create a model for the rest of the world." We made our way down into the town, where a crowd had begun to gather in the main square. I could feel their fear, their confusion, and their wonder pulsing against my newfound awareness like waves against a shore. As we approached, a hush fell over the crowd. I recognized faces, neighbors, old schoolmates, the local shopkeepers, all staring at me with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with a permanently worried expression, stepped forward. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice quavering. "What are you?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon me. "I'm Emma Hawthorne," I began, my voice carrying easily across the square. "And I'm here to help you understand the changes that have occurred." Over the next hour, I explained as best I could about the hidden world that had always existed alongside our own, about the shadows that had threatened to consume everything, and about the choice I had made to merge the realms and bring balance. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in their eyes slowly giving way to understanding. Some looked frightened, others excited, but all of them were irrevocably changed by the knowledge. "So what happens now?" someone called out from the crowd. I smiled, feeling a surge of determination. "Now, we learn. We adapt. We grow. This new world is full of wonders and, yes, some dangers, but together we can navigate it." Mr. Burkhart stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. "We'll be establishing a center for education and support. Anyone who's experiencing difficulties with the new aspects of our reality can come for help." The mayor nodded, seeming to find his footing. "We'll convert the old community center. It's centrally located and big enough to accommodate whatever we need." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, I felt a tug on my consciousness. Something was calling me, pulling me towards the old cemetery. "I need to go," I said to Sarah and Mr. Burkhart. "There's something I have to do." They nodded in understanding, and I made my way through the town, marveling at how different everything looked through my new senses. The veil between worlds might be gone, but the echoes of it remained, visible to me in swirling patterns of energy that danced around every living thing. As I entered the cemetery, I felt a shift in the air. The spirits of the accused witches, long trapped between worlds, now stood before me in all their spectral glory. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw, stepped forward. I recognized her from the historical records, Sarah Good, one of the first to be accused in the witch trials. "Emma Hawthorne," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You have done what we could not. You have brought balance to a world long divided." I bowed my head in respect. "I only finished what you all started. Your suffering, your resistance, it paved the way for this moment." Sarah Good smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "And now, young one, you bear the burden of maintaining that balance. It will not be an easy task." "I'm beginning to realize that," I admitted, feeling the constant pull of countless realities against my consciousness. Another spirit stepped forward. Giles Corey, the man pressed to death for refusing to enter a plea. "You'll need guidance, child. The power you wield is beyond anything this world has seen." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "Will you help me? All of you. Your wisdom, your experiences. They could be invaluable in navigating this new reality." The spirits exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Sarah Good turned back to me. "We will. Our time of rest has come and gone. Now we have a chance to truly make a difference." As we talked, I felt my power growing, adapting. The cracked lens of the Polaroid camera, now a part of my very being, seemed to pulse with each new understanding I gained. Suddenly, a thought struck me. "I need to see something," I said, more to myself than to the spirits. I raised my hand, focusing on the power that flowed through me. A flash of light erupted from my palm, reminiscent of the camera's flash but far more potent. When the light faded, a photograph hung in the air before me. But this was unlike any photo I had taken before. It showed not just the physical world but the spiritual one layered on top of it. And more than that, it showed possibilities. Countless timelines branching out from this moment, each one a potential future. "Incredible," Giles Corey breathed, peering at the image. "You can see the very fabric of reality itself." I stared at the photo, my mind reeling from the implications. "I can see everything, every choice, every consequence. It's overwhelming." Sarah Good placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her touch cool but reassuring. "And that, my dear, is why you'll need help. No one person, no matter how powerful, should bear this burden alone." As the reality of my new existence settled over me, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, determination, and a profound sense of responsibility. The world had changed, and I had changed with it. There would be challenges ahead, dangers I couldn't even imagine. But there would also be wonders, discoveries that would reshape our understanding of existence itself. "Thank you," I said to the assembled spirits, "for your guidance, your support. I have a feeling I'm going to need it in the days to come." As if in response to my words, I felt a ripple in the fabric of reality. Somewhere, someone was calling out for help, struggling to cope with the merging of worlds. And somewhere else, a new threat was stirring, drawn by the power that now flowed freely through our realm. I turned to the spirits, a determined set to my jaw. "It's time. The world is waiting, and there's work to be done." With a final nod of respect to the spirits of Salem's past, I stepped out of the cemetery and into the bright sunlight of a new day. The Polaroid camera, once just a tool for seeing the unseen, was now a part of me, a symbol of the balance I had to maintain, the bridge I had become. As I walked back toward the town, I could feel the eyes of both the living and the dead upon me. Emma Hawthorne, the girl who had inherited her grandmother's house and a magical camera, was gone. In her place stood something new, a guardian of reality, a keeper of balance, a bridge between worlds. The aftermath of my choice was just beginning to unfold, but with the wisdom of the past, the support of my allies, and the power that now flowed through my veins, I was ready to face whatever came next. The world had changed, and so had I. And together, we would step into this brave new reality, one photograph at a time.